The Silent Storm. My world was built from glass, steel, and light. Not the light from the sun, but the blue light of a computer screen. I was an architect, and I designed the future from my desk. My name is James. My life was a series of deadlines, notifications, and conference calls. I measured my success by my productivity. I believed that being busy meant I was important. Sleep was just a necessary pause between work sessions. Food was fuel that I often consumed while answering emails. My connection to the world was through a Wi-Fi signal. I loved my work. I loved the challenge of creating something new and modern. But a huge new project was demanding all of my attention. The deadline was approaching fast. The city was full of too many distractions. The noise, the people, the constant invitations. I needed a place where I could have complete and total focus for 1 week. So I rented a remote cabin in the mountains. It was a modern cabin with all the necessary technology. The pictures online showed a perfect productivity retreat. I saw it as a strategic move. I would disconnect from people, but not from my work. I would be alone with my designs, my computer, and my thoughts. I packed 2 laptops, 3 external hard drives, and multiple power banks. I was prepared for any technical problem. I was ready to work without any interruptions. I arrived on a Monday afternoon. The cabin was beautiful, with large windows looking out at the forest. But I did not really notice the view. I only saw the strong Wi-Fi signal. The air outside was clean and fresh, but I did not take a deep breath. My first action was to set up my workstation on the large wooden table. My priority was clear. For the first day, my plan worked perfectly. I worked for 16 hours straight. The only sounds were the clicking of my keyboard and the hum of my computer's fan. The mountains outside my window were just a silent green background. They were like a high-resolution wallpaper on a screen. They did not feel real to me. I felt powerful and in control of my world. The project was moving forward quickly. This trip was a brilliant idea. I was going to meet my deadline easily. On the second afternoon, while I was deep in my work, the weather began to change. The bright blue sky slowly turned into a dark and heavy gray. A strong wind started to blow through the tall pine trees. The sound was like a low whisper at first, but soon the whisper turned into a loud and angry howl. Rain began to fall against the large windows. It started as a light tapping, but quickly became a torrential downpour. The storm had arrived without any warning. I was a little annoyed by the noise of the storm. It was a distraction I had not planned for, but I put on my headphones and continued with my work. Then the lights in the cabin flickered once. They flickered a second time. And then, with a loud crack of thunder that shook the entire cabin, everything went dark. The cabin was plunged into a sudden and absolute darkness. My computer screen went black. The music in my headphones stopped playing. A deep silence fell over the room. My first reaction was not fear. It was pure, unfiltered frustration. This could not be happening. My perfect plan was being ruined by a stupid storm. I turned on my phone's flashlight. Its small beam cut through the darkness. I went to the fuse box, but everything seemed fine. The power was out in the whole area. Okay, no problem, I said to myself. I had my laptop's battery. I could still work for a few more hours. The power would surely be back on by then. I rebooted my laptop. The screen lit up, and I felt a wave of relief. But then I saw the two symbols in the corner that made my heart sink. No Wi-Fi. No internet. My phone confirmed my biggest fear. There was no signal at all, not a single bar. I was completely and totally cut off from the outside world. Now a real sense of panic started to creep in. All my project files were stored on the cloud. My entire workflow depended on a constant internet connection. Without the internet, my powerful laptop was just a useless box of metal and plastic. I was an architect with no blueprints, a writer with no pen or paper. The battery icon on my screen showed only 2 hours remaining. After that, I would not even have light. The walls of the modern cabin suddenly felt like a cage. I walked over to the large window and looked out. The world outside was a wild chaos of wind and rain. The beautiful forest now looked dark and threatening. The silence in the cabin was the loudest thing I had ever heard. There was no hum from a computer, no notification sounds from my phone. There was only the storm and my own breathing. I had come here to be alone with my work, but now I was just alone. I was alone with my thoughts, my frustration, and a growing sense of helplessness. I paced back and forth in the small cabin like a trapped animal. I kept checking my phone for a signal every 2 minutes, but there was nothing. Still nothing. Who could I even call? I did not know the number for the power company here. I did not know any of my neighbors. I did not even know if I had any neighbors. The sun began to set, and the darkness outside became as deep as the darkness inside. My laptop battery finally died. The last of my blue light was gone. Now the only light was from my phone's flashlight. I knew I had to conserve its battery. I turned it off, and the darkness became complete. It was unnerving. I had not felt a darkness like this in many years. In the city, there was always some light, a street light, a neon sign, the glow from a nearby building. But here, there was nothing. I stumbled around the cabin trying to find candles or a lantern. I opened cupboards and drawers, but I found nothing. This modern cabin was not prepared for an old problem. My frustration slowly started to turn into a cold, hard fear. I was completely unprepared for this situation. My modern skills were useless here. I could design a skyscraper, but I did not know how to handle a simple power outage. I felt like a child who was lost in the dark. It was a humiliating feeling. The storm raged on outside. I sat on the floor in the dark, just listening to the sound of the wind. I felt smaller and more insignificant than I ever had in my life. I had a full kitchen, but I did not know how to cook without electricity. The electric stove was useless. The microwave was dead. I had some snacks, but that was all. As the hours passed, the cabin also started to get cold. The central heating was electric, so it was off too. a deep chill began to seep into my bones. I realized I had to do something. I could not just sit here in the cold and dark. I remembered seeing a fireplace in the living room. It was my only hope for warmth. I had never made a real fire in my life. I had seen it in movies, but that was all. I had no idea where to even begin with something so primitive. Using my phone's light sparingly, I found the fireplace. There was a small pile of wood next to it and a box of matches on the mantelpiece. I had the tools. Now I just needed the knowledge. I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. This was my first real challenge that did not involve a computer screen. I had to survive this. I had to create my own light and my own warmth. The successful architect had to learn a new, much older kind of design. My first few attempts to build a fire were a complete failure. I used too much paper, which burned out too quickly. The small pieces of wood would not catch the flame. Smoke started to fill the room, making my eyes water. It was a frustrating and humbling experience. I felt incompetent. This simple task was defeating me. I almost gave up. I thought about just wrapping myself in all the blankets, but the cold was deep, and the idea of a warm fire was a powerful motivation for me. I decided to try one more time. This time, I tried to think about it logically. A fire needs fuel, heat, and air. I had been forgetting about the importance of air. I carefully arranged the wood in a small pyramid shape. I left small gaps between the logs to allow the air to circulate. It looked like a tiny, primitive structure. I struck a match. The small flame danced in the darkness. I carefully brought it to the small pieces of paper under the wood. This time, the kindling caught fire. A small, steady flame began to grow. It spread from the kindling to the larger logs. Soon, a real warm fire was burning brightly in the fireplace. It was beautiful. I had done it. I had created light and warmth with my own 2 hands. The feeling of victory was more satisfying than finishing any complex design project. I sat in front of the fireplace for hours, just watching the flames dance. The fire was my television, my computer, and my only companion in the dark. The storm continued for another full day. But I was not scared anymore. With the fire going, the cabin felt like a safe and cozy shelter from the wildness outside. The silence was still there, but it was different now. It was a comfortable silence, filled with the soft, crackling sound of the burning wood. It was peaceful. Without my phone or laptop, I started to feel incredibly bored. My mind was so used to constant information, I needed something to do, something to focus on. I started to explore the cabin more carefully. In a small, dusty bookshelf in the corner, I found a collection of old books. They had been left behind by the owner. The books were old, with soft, worn-out covers. They were classic novels, books of poetry, and guides about the local nature. They were relics from an analog world. I picked up a book of short stories. I sat by the fire and started to read. My eyes had to adjust to reading by the flickering light of the flames. It was a slow and deliberate process. I could not scroll or click. I had to turn each page carefully. I became completely lost in the world of the story. I had not read a book for pleasure in many, many years. My reading was always for work, but this was different. This was a quiet joy I had forgotten existed. The next day, the storm finally passed. I woke up to a strange and unfamiliar silence. The wind had stopped howling. I went to the window to look outside. The world was washed clean. The sun was shining brightly, and the sky was a brilliant blue. Everything was covered in a fresh layer of white snow. For the first time since I arrived, I felt a desire to go outside. I was not thinking about my work or my deadline. I was just curious about the world beyond my door. I put on my coat and boots and stepped outside. The cold air was crisp and clean. It felt good to breathe it in. The world was so quiet and so still. I started to walk into the forest. My boots made a soft, crunching sound in the fresh snow. The pine trees were heavy with it, their branches drooping down. I noticed details I had never seen before. I saw the tracks of a small animal in the snow. I heard the distant song of a bird. I saw how the sunlight made the snow sparkle. I was not walking to get somewhere. I was just walking. There was no goal or destination. My only purpose was to see and to listen to the world around me. I found a large flat rock near a frozen stream. I brushed the snow off and sat down. The sun was warm on my face. The silence of the forest was complete. And in that silence, I finally started to hear my own thoughts. Not thoughts about work or projects, but deeper thoughts about my life and my happiness. I realized how tired I was. Not just physically tired, but tired in my soul. I had been running a marathon for years without ever taking a break. My life was full of success, but was it full of joy? I had built amazing structures for other people, but I had forgotten to build a peaceful space inside myself. This storm, this power outage, was not a disaster. It was a gift. It was a forced pause that I desperately needed, but did not know how to ask for. The peace I felt sitting on that rock was deeper than any satisfaction from a finished project. It was a quiet, solid feeling. It was the feeling of being home in my own skin. I understood that my value as a person was not tied to my productivity. My worth was not measured by how many emails I could answer in an hour. I stayed by the stream for a long time. I did not think about the past or the future. I was just present in that single perfect moment. I was just being. On the morning of the fourth day, something happened. A low hum started in the cabin. A light flickered on in the kitchen. The power was finally back. My phone, which was plugged into the wall, suddenly came to life. It started buzzing and vibrating without stopping. A flood of notifications rushed in. Emails, missed calls, news alerts, social media updates. The digital world was back. It was shouting for my attention, loud and demanding. A month ago, this sound would have made me feel important, but now it just felt like noise. It felt like an intrusion into the peace I had found. I looked at my laptop on the table. Its screen was glowing, ready for me to return. The deadline for my project was still there, waiting for me. But I did not go to it. Not yet. I walked to the door and stepped outside into the cold morning air. I wanted to see the sun rise without a screen in my hand. The sky was painted with soft colors of pink and orange. It was the most beautiful design I had ever seen, and it was created without any planning or any technology. When I returned to the city, I was a different man. I did not quit my job. I still loved being an architect, but I changed the way I lived my life. I finished my project, and it was the best work I had ever done. The new space and clarity in my mind made my designs better, more human, and more thoughtful. I still work hard, but I also schedule time for silence. I take walks in the park. I read books. I turn off my phone and just sit by the fire. I learned something very important in that remote cabin. I learned that sometimes you have to completely disconnect from the world to reconnect with yourself. The storm did not ruin my plan. It gave me a new one. A plan to build a life that was not just successful, but also peaceful, meaningful, and full of quiet joy. I hope this session was helpful. Please like and subscribe to our channel for more such interesting stories. Take care, everyone.